Hey, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Frank About Health. Today is July 13th, 2023, and I have to say that I'm very much looking forward to this show because this is actually my first time in being able to introduce to the talkradio.nyc family, the viewers, including yourself, a new host to our network. But her show will be launching in about a week and a half, and we will discuss more about it during this show. But this is, after all, Frank About Health, and it is a health related matter, a mental health related matter. But we're going to take a different spin on it and look in terms of workplace diversity, is a reflection of neurodiversity, among other aspects of individuals that would be able to understand how you can foster leadership skills. Now, that being said, my usual disclaimer, which is typically based on health related issues, I'm going to pivot a little bit and look more from the labor perspective. Usually, I tell everyone that any information on this show is not meant to take away your current treatment protocols, medications, specialist relationships, so forth and so on. But the information you will hear today can be controversial depending in some circles of who you're speaking about the issues of, but they're not to be misled or misrepresenting any of the individuals that fit the neurodiverse or socially diverse work groups that are out there. So let's look at this information as food for thought. Myself and my special guest today will be able to foster a very individualized conversation so that if you walk away from this episode with some insights that could be very thought provoking, that is good because what you're going to want to do is see Dr. Mira Branco's new show when it comes on in a couple weeks. So I'm being the catalyst for her today. And therefore, I want to welcome Dr. Mira Brancu right here on Frank About Health, which is, of course, seen on talk or heard on talkradio.nyc, as well as streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and twitch.tv. So, all of you out there that have the ability to issue any comments based on our discussion, please put so. And then I know that our engineer will forward whatever they are and we'll read them out loud, especially if you have any questions. Now, it is my time to introduce Dr. Mira Brancu, and I should just give her the respectable introduction based on her background. Today's guest, Dr. Mira Brancu, helps executives and their teams lead well today and better navigate tomorrow. With specialties in team development and inclusive leadership, Mira brings 20 plus years of experience in healthcare and academia, including an award winning leadership career at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs and has a faculty appointment at Duke University. Dr. Brancu is a contributor for Psychology Today and Thrive Global and author of Millennials Guide to Workplace Politics. Her organization and development firm Towerscope was awarded the 2021 Corporate Philanthropy Award from the Triangle Business Journal for contributions supporting the professional and economic development of underserved women. That all being said, I welcome you, Mira, to Frank About Health. I am interested to see how both of our understanding of neuropsychology and behavior has a different spectrum or a different observation, especially in the workplace. So, welcome aboard.
Thanks, Frank. Great to be here. Really excited to be on Frank About Health and with Talk Radio and YC today. And just really, we had a really good conversation when we met about this, about our sort of integrated interests, overlapping interests, but from very different perspectives, right? I'm a clinical psychologist by training. And so I come at it from that perspective, and then you're coming at it from, well, a combination, a wealth of business and neurology expertise and mental health. And so we spoke a little bit about what we might talk about today that would integrate these two to
Yes.
connect your show and my show, right? The hard
Right.
skills is going to be my show coming out. And
Right.
what would that look like? So I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Me too. I mean, it's funny. I've been doing this show for a couple years now, and when I met Sam originally, quite some time ago, the show was going to be called Frank About Epilepsy, because at that time in 2016, when I first came to the network, epilepsy was like still the stigma of, oh, what kind of person is an epilepsy patient? Are they really someone who's mentally ill? Are they autistic? Are they unfortunately a drug addict? Are they, just not to be trusted individuals? And the irony is when COVID hit, I was able to come back to this show and really branch about all neurological type of topics. And of course, epilepsy would still be a mainstay. But epilepsy right now, compared to what we just went through with 3 years of COVID, people can talk about epilepsy like they can talk about the common cold. I mean, there's still going to be controversial aspects to it, but there are directions and research and abilities for people to find cures to at least manage seizures, if not necessarily cure them. The stigma is no longer an issue in that domain. What is the stigma is when people are trained through the healthcare system to not advocate for themselves. They don't understand that they have a say in their treatment and in their choices and in their way of paying for it, among other issues. And of course, not to mention healthcare in itself always has its social issues and somewhat political issues. But what I liked about when we first met, through our meeting a couple of weeks ago, is that you said you had started your career in neuropsychology, but you found the workplace culture and the dynamics of leadership potential to be the way to best, show your knowledge and your research experience in the field. And it's not about advocating for mental health as much as it's using your neurodiverse background, epileptics included, to a strength, or to be able to represent the communities, whether it's autistic, ADHD, um, autism, or epilepsy, as a skill set that a lot of people need to be more aware of, so that people can look at their weakness, clinical weakness, as a strength, as an advantage. And that's what I'm learning, or looking forward to learn more about on today's show.
Yeah, and so just since you had disclaimers, I'm going to have disclaimers too now and share some of them. Yes, I'm a clinical psychologist by training,
Right.
but when I talk on this show, when I'll talk on my show, the work that I do is not doing therapy. It is coaching, it is consulting, leadership, team, and organizational development. I had sort of informally respecialized in that over the course of my time in leadership roles, and now actually doing the work of coaching and organizational development. And so the way that I think about this is initially and earlier in my career, because I got into management and leadership so quickly, people would ask me, like, don't you miss clinical psychology? Don't you miss doing the therapy? And I said, I use my people skills and my understanding of mental health and how people work in relational ways of doing things every day in all the things that I do as a leader and as a mentor and supervisor and coach, and all of those skill sets are not lost.
Right.
And over time, what I realized is I could integrate them by just coming at the world of work and leadership with this sort of greater empathy and understanding that there are different ways to be a leader, and
Right.
those who have neurodevelopmental conditions such
Mhm.
as ADHD or autism or other things like that, or if they have mental health conditions like depression, anxiety, PTSD, that it is helpful to understand where they're coming from, so we don't make assumptions,
Right.
and that they might go about their leadership career in a different way, and that's okay too. There isn't one right way to be a leader, but it's good to know about what it takes to get either the accommodations or support, or lean into the different skill sets that they've developed over time,
Right.
and support. So I'm excited to sort of lean into that kind of conversation today.
Oh, and what I love about it is that, on various episodes of Frank About Health, I'm always looking at you, the patient, have a problem. These are ways to go about solving it for yourself and with your doctor. But in this case, you, the individual leader or leader to be, has a difference. We don't want to call it a problem, but let's look at the strengths of that difference and become the leader that you're meant to be with that special benefit. I don't know if that's the right word to use.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Or
what makes it unique is that if you've come this far in a leadership role, you have overcome an awful lot of challenges, adversity, people questioning you probably, you questioning yourself probably, you finding
Right.
different ways to work in order to be this successful. You've worked probably 2 to 3 times as hard to get there. And so that's an incredibly powerful, resilient skill set.
Yes.
And at the same time, it does still come along with some challenges to, be aware of. And then if you're just a leader, having never faced those things, how can you become a better leader by understanding the different types of challenges or the different diversity that different people bring,
Right.
whether it's in mental health or neurodevelopmental conditions or gender or race or anything related to diversity, equity, inclusion is like
Right.
a critical skill right now for all leaders. So the more you can educate yourself in understanding how to bring out the best in others, will make you much stronger a leader and where people actually want to work, right?
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's really unfortunate. I used to say a phrase to my friends and family: "Perception is everything," and it's unfortunate that when someone is differently abled, let's just call it that for this purpose of our conversation, there all of a sudden people defer to the negative perception of that individual when they're actually, I personally, after living most of my life with epilepsy and having it under control but still being able to advocate in my best way forward, not just for myself but for people also living with my condition, I want to transfer that skill over even to just, okay, you have this condition, but what difference can you make in the world now while you join the other that are, what would be the right thing? Neuronormative? I don't want to give words that are not correct, but at the same time,
They
those
use
that are typical.
neurotypical. I think that
Neurotypical.
there's a lot of people within the neurodiverse community that don't like using that term,
Right,
neurotypical, because then you're like assuming that there's one typical way to be, thinking, and that's the right way and stuff like that. So,
right.
yeah, language is everything, but it's real complicated these days, So,
Yes.
yes.
No, I'm just thinking like, there's so much that I want to say, but I'm also being respectful of the sections of our program. So I'm going to wait and postpone those questions until we get there. But the thing is that every day when I wake up, I see in the news media or on talk shows or even in some of our programming that's out there, you're just getting punched in the face again with, oh, okay, this person is different, therefore you're supposed to have some kind of perception of them in order to enjoy the show. Or even in terms of our news media, the social issues that we are faced with, we're supposed to either sit back and be frustrated over them or try to find a solution to how to deal with them, you know? And so either way, I see we're almost headed towards our first break, but when we return to our second section, I think I want to break down with you, Mira, uh, 3 or 4 specific neurodiverse populations or segments. And maybe you could just share with us exactly what type of leadership skills they probably are unaware of that they can learn to foster better or foster, in whatever direction they need to go,
Yeah,
among
let's engage
among other
in it
things.
together. You bring your expertise and I'll bring my knowledge and we'll share. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for our continued discussion right here on Frank About Health with my special guest, Dr. Mira Brancu, right here on talkradio.nyc and all of our social media. We'll be back in a few.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
What really drives success in business? Introducing Intangify, the show that explores the intangible assets that create value and growth. I'm Matthew Asbell, your host and an attorney focused on innovation. Join me Fridays at noon Eastern to discover how innovation, culture, and other intangibles shape thriving companies from startups to established businesses. We'll share strategies to unleash your business's true potential. Tune in live on talkradio.nyc Fridays at noon Eastern and intangify your business today.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Hey there, and welcome back. And as we mentioned earlier, this episode is looking at the neurodiverse population in how they are able to enhance their leadership skills, and look at also how to obtain additional resources wherever they're needed so that they can maximize their efficiency when they are becoming leaders in the workplace. And so, Mira, I definitely want to cover not just people with epilepsy, but all the other neurodiverse populations that you've also been working with or coaching and things like that. So, by all means, let's just start the conversation in terms of which categories of neurodiverse people you think need more advocacy as well as more discussion on how they can enhance their leadership.
Yeah, and let me just sort of preface this by saying I know a lot, but I don't consider myself an expert in this area. There are people who study and research this all the time and keep up to date with all of the things, and I read their work and I consider them experts, and I consider myself a practitioner and someone who applies the work. So,
Right.
And then, yes, somebody who is an ally and somebody who, or wants to, consider themselves or be considered as an ally, and a supporter. And so, so I'm coming at this from early career, starting to train as a neuropsychologist, and then over
Right.
time, just sort of tracking these concerns and trying to stay on top of it.
Sure.
I think the areas that the two sort of most common conditions that I'm seeing more and more sort of focus on and interest in, which is great, is people with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and people with autism. And the change in autism, even in terms of how we've we used to define it and the terms used before versus now, it's become much more nuanced, and we've leaned much more into it. People with ADHD and with autism are no longer afraid to share that piece about them.
Yes.
Like you were saying, like what's happened since the pandemic. And this is one of the nice outcomes, is that they're more open with sharing. And then some are just now in adulthood realizing that as a result of people sharing more and more about their own awareness of how this has affected them, more and more people are realizing, oh gosh, that sounds like me. Maybe I should get assessed. And they go and get assessed and realized in middle adulthood, oh my gosh, I've been struggling this whole entire time, and this is what it was. Now, I will say that in addition, my expertise and my interest areas are with women in leadership and with team development. Those are my two areas.
Right.
And so I think a lot about, like, what does this mean in terms of women who have ADHD and women who have autism? And what does this mean in terms of people on teams who, might work very differently from each other, some of whom may have ADHD and autism, right? And for women and girls, they are usually underdiagnosed with ADHD and with autism. They go under the radar. They, learn more ways to mask, and there's lots of sort of reasons for why that might be that we can get into. But those are kind of the two areas that I'm most intrigued by.
Right.
And I'm also interested in learning from you about epilepsy. And because I don't know as much about that, and I'd love to hear more about how you think about it, about like what we need to know in the work world and what we need to know about that when it comes to leadership challenges or opportunities, or team challenges or opportunities related to epilepsy. So we could look at that. We could also look at associated mental health conditions that sometimes crop up among these conditions, and those are typically
Depression, PTSD,
anxiety, and PTSD. Yes, those
Right.
are common. So those are comorbid experiences because of how much work you have to do to deal with some of the challenges for some people facing
Right.
a greater adversity, with people's reactions or navigating social issues and things like that.
Well, yeah, I've learned to accept, especially, I mean, I've had a diverse career. I was in banking, then I was in insurance, and I was in the music industry. I mean, I've had a chance to see
That's right.
pathologies up and down the spectrum, especially with people who are neuronormative. We don't want to stay away from the word that can be still stigmatizing. But the thing is that what I've learned is that if you feel more depressed or more anxious because you're not being treated with equity or inclusion because you're different, that just becomes your comorbid reaction. So I don't consider, unless you're a bipolar patient, let's say, I don't consider someone suffering from anxious or depression as the core value or the core difference. I look at the neurological problem as the core difference and then look at the comorbid reactions as part of the picture or part of the puzzle. So
Yes, and
I would,
what's interesting is that there are a lot of women who have all along been treated for anxiety or depression, and now realize actually the underlying reason for it was actually something like ADHD, and
right.
I mean, this is not everybody, but it happens, So I like where you're going with like making sure you get a full assessment done to make sure you're not missing something about what's going on.
Oh yeah, because one of the things that I was telling Sam when I came back to talkradio.nyc is I said, this is going to create the whole, in the house for 5 months, depending on the state you lived in, or 6 foot distance, or being told how to function. You can't travel anywhere. You have to learn from home. Zoom is your way of life now. It's like you can't even see families for years on Thanksgiving for whatever the reasons were, especially not spreading it. Plus, at the time when there was no vaccine or no treatment. Now, the thing is I knew from the start that COVID was going to share the wealth of what neurodiverse people have been feeling all along, because even those that were clinically healthy were now experiencing the limitations and restrictions of what it's like to be restrained from functioning, just so that we don't help exacerbate the pandemic. So I believe that everyone is going through increased levels of ADHD as well as PTSD, whether they have epilepsy or not, whether they have autism or not. So that's why I'm interested in one question that came to my mind when you just talked about higher incidences of people with ADHD and PTSD is, would you say that from all the coaching you've done in the workplace that you noticed a substantial increase, especially when people were getting back to work instead of being in Zoom or hybrid situations?
Yeah. I, I don't think that there's an increase in the rates. I think there's an increase in the recognition and awareness, diagnosis, or admission of the fact that this is a challenge, and that they are recognizing and would like support with. Whereas
Yes.
before, you sort of you kept it more hidden because you were worried that if people found out about your condition, and that's honestly like that applies to every type of condition where you worry about what would it mean if people found out that I have X, Y, and Z condition? Like, will they treat me differently? Will they judge me? Will they push me out of my leadership role? Will I be ignored, dismissed, invalidated? And so I'm not convinced that the actual true rates of these conditions are increasing as much as the awareness,
Exposure.
recognition, and that could also mean people going to their doctors for something real specific that they can
Right.
now ask about. It's more tangible, and then being diagnosed later in life than past generations that would just have sort of like coped with it or not spoken about it. It's very similar. So, because of the fact that I worked with for the Department of Veterans Affairs, it's
Right.
really similar to what I remember about veterans coming back from the Iraq and Afghanistan era wars. When they came back, it was much more acceptable to indicate that they were struggling with PTSD or anxiety or something else that was
Right.
related to their experience after deployment or traumatic brain injury, right? And
Right.
because they were speaking up more and sharing more, and it became normalized, the people from the Vietnam era were like 70 years old coming forward then saying, I think I might have PTSD. I think, and realizing it was okay to acknowledge or just learning about the symptoms and seeing it in themselves because they were talking to people who were younger and more open about it. And
Right.
I think that's kind of similar. That's my assessment of what's happening now. That's similar to that kind of situation.
I
It's
agree.
kind
And
of
you know
generational
what I
awareness.
also think? I mean, not only what you called it generational awareness, is that what you said?
Yes.
Oh yeah, I totally agree, and it's kind of interesting. I know people on the show have heard me talk about spending the last 3 years not only in COVID lockdown, but also living with my parents because I was advocating for my father who was recovering from prostate cancer, and that in itself, to be a caregiver while also having COVID, I mean, that was really an intense period of time. But what I did learn from that experience is that while we're all trying to be transparent, did we get infected by COVID? Do we need to stand 6 feet distance? Are we eligible for the vaccine once it's released? All of a sudden, when we're all primed to be very transparent about our COVID status, it transfers out to being transparent. Yes, by the way, I have epilepsy. Yes, by the way, I'm suffering from some form of mental illness, or I have narcissistic personality disorder, especially if they're seeing a psychiatrist at the same time. You know, I think transparency about whether it's an old stigmatized illness or whether it was something as recent as a pandemic has become more of the social norm because everyone's still looking to basically survive. And anyone who was from the perspective of it's not real or whatever, you really can't speak to them. I mean, the issue is that those that want to continue to survive and thrive in this life, with or without your disability, whatever that may be, we have all learned. I think our society has learned that we just got to be open about everything and forget what the stigma may be. And the irony is that when everybody's open about it, it's no longer a stigma because there's consensus. There's a whole sense of community that we're all here to help each other. And that's what anybody wants to begin with. It's so
That is
interesting
the
how we
hope.
go about our own different pathways just to get to point A to point B.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
That's the hope. Absolutely.
Well, again, the time has flown and we're ready for our second break. But when we get back, I want to get more specific to what you were talking about earlier in terms of dealing with a lot of women who were having more incidences of PTSD and their leadership styles in the workplace, and really start to break it down in terms of how you want to start steering up your show when you come to talkradio.nyc in a few weeks. That all
Sounds
being
great.
said, everybody, yes, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. So everybody, just stay tuned. We'll be back in a few.
Are you passionate about the conversation around racism? Hi, I'm Reverend Dr. TLC, host of the Dismantle Racism Show, which airs every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc. Join me and my amazing guests as we discuss ways to uncover, dismantle, and eradicate racism. That's Thursdays at 11 o'clock a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
In a post-COVID world, you may have many unanswered questions regarding your health. Are you looking to live a healthier lifestyle? Do you have a desire to learn more about mental health and enhance your quality of life? Or do you just want to participate in self-understanding and awareness? I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each Thursday, I will tackle these questions and work to enlighten you. Tune in every Thursday at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will be Frank About Health to advocate for all of us.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time right here on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. And for those of you interested to know what's behind me, I am in the cafeteria at NYU Grossman School of Medicine, courtesy of NYU Langone Health. I use this room when I'm learning something new. I consider it my education platform. And here I'm learning about Dr. Mira Brancu and what she is offering in the workplace to a lot of individuals that are dealing with disability issues. But at the same time, we're going to learn more about a lot of gender-specific aspects to it. So I'm interested to know more, like you said earlier, Mira, that you had noticed a greater incidence of PTSD as well as ADHD in women in leadership positions. So can you give me an example of how you've noticed that?
Yeah, and again, just to clarify, I don't
Right.
think that there has necessarily been increased incidences, although I think that, yes, as a society, we all have experienced a national level trauma from the pandemic. And for some people who already were predisposed to having trauma exposures before, or
Right.
even already having PTSD, this did not help at all.
No.
So yeah, we need to sort of understand, break it down from the at the individual level, and then also societal level and the interaction between the two. I will say that for women and men don't necessarily have differences in terms of the sort of rates of PTSD diagnosis, but they do have a greater trauma exposure over a lifetime when it comes to interpersonal trauma. As compared to other types of trauma like accidents, which men experience a little bit more of those kinds of, and interpersonal trauma can create greater incidences sometimes of PTSD because it comes with such a complicated situation because there's betrayal involved, and it involves usually it's by somebody committed, perpetrated by somebody and that can lead to greater rates. And so what that means is over time, there might be higher incidences or experiences of trauma exposure as a result of the interpersonal trauma exposure as a result of being a woman facing things like sexual assault or harassment.
Yes.
And that, can happen in the workplace, the sexual harassment, especially the gender biases and, microaggressions related to that.
Right.
And then there's the societal stuff at the national level around the pandemic. So it's a compounding effect for certain subpopulations who are already predisposed to exposure for various
Right.
reasons. It's not just women who have higher exposure to certain types of trauma. Some marginalized populations because of poverty and adversity. Racial trauma, they also have greater exposure, and that is also kind of like an ongoing, not one incidence, but like a lifetime of incidences. And so being sensitive to recognizing that, and at the same time recognizing how amazing it is for any woman who has actually faced those challenges, walked through that, those adversities, and is now functioning as a leader in a high level position. God, the amount of resiliency that it took, right, is incredible. And at the same time, it takes an enormous toll. And being a leader can be isolating. Sometimes it can be lonely, and it forces you to really have to face a lot of personal growth. So leadership, I also often say, like, leadership development is personal development. At every leadership challenge and level, you are also working through your own personal beliefs and thoughts about certain things that you're facing. And the first, so I have, like, when I start talking on my podcast, the hard skills, it's the reason it's called the hard skills is because these are not soft skills. Like, these are really hard to face some of these things. And I look at 5 different developmental stages of leadership identity development for women, marginalized people, really anybody, but especially within these subpopulations. And one of the first level is facing uncertainty. So what messages have you received in your life about taking risks, and is it okay or is it not okay, and why is it not okay, for example? The next one is developing your leadership identity, and hearing a lot of messages and seeing a lot of messages about what a leader should look like, what they sound like, that going back to, like, that normative sort of look, quote unquote normative, and having to just at each level of a leadership identity developmental process, trying to evaluate and separate what piece of this has been my experience in the past that I have to let go of because it's now no longer serving its purpose. What piece of this are pieces from societal messages about gender biases, for example, that I've bought into, and now I have to separate from my own real, like, identity of who I am and what's important to me. That is not an easy process to go through, right? And then now think about, like, let's say that is like your typical, woman going through the leadership development process, right? Now, let's say you add somebody who also has ADHD, right? And that person may have been, trying to figure out how to learn how to budget and allocate and organize their time, their energy, their attention, and how to manage their productivity and prioritize and, shift attention to only the most important things. Those things only get harder the more you get into, like, greater complexity and role in systems with distractions of people and processes. And so being able to sort of tease all of those things apart and find and develop a plan that is right for you is a lot of what we'll be sort of trying to dissect and explore throughout, our talk. If you think about, now, like, let's say somebody with autism, right? And their commonalities and overlap with ADHD are things like you can get overstimulated, depending on the situation. You could end up hyper focusing depending on the situation. You could end up over persisting or being overly perfectionistic to make up for what you've been sort of working through. There are social challenges like interrupting or not tracking people's feelings and reactions, or your own feelings of inadequacy or concern with lack of acceptance. All of these things come up when you're a leader. I mean, every single one of these things in a leadership role become a challenge. And, so we talk a lot about when is it time to delegate? When is it time to partner? How do you find complementary skill sets? How do you lean into instead like your creativity or your best focus moments, or the things that you're so passionate about that it will drive the business forward, just to like lean in there, and so these are the sort of interactions between these sort of neurodevelopmental conditions, the mental health conditions, and then that gender piece on top of it. A lot of women become over perfectionistic or over plan or try to over control the environment just to manage it all, just to like calm it all down and tamp it down and manage it. But sometimes, you sort of overdo it, right, to your detriment and sabotage yourself. So trying to find the right balance would be like, one of those questions that I get often. How do I balance these two opposing forces, right? Between complete lack of structure and over-structured, complete lack of control and too much control. Wanting to have the creative opportunity and flexibility, but knowing I need some amount of sort of guideposts, all of these things, come up for women in leadership roles who also might have, additional mental health concerns or additional neurodevelopmental challenges, autism, ADHD, PTSD, depression, anxiety, all of these things.
I pick up two key things from everything you've just said. One is when they're faced in a leadership role with all of their own inadequacies and they're trying to work through them while at the same time being an effective leader, it appears to the followers, let's just call, or the other workplace team members, a form of hypervigilance, or maybe even to some degree narcissism. And it's incredible how the perception, which can be filtered differently, but depending on who the team member is, can misconstrue what the original intent is of that female leader, or even the regardless of gender, the leader that is also dealing with a neurological issue like epilepsy or PTSD or autism. It's amazing. You literally, in the last 15 minutes, described what your show is going to be about. And I mean, I even have questions about its format. So I think this is a perfect segue to go into our final break and then really break down the hard skills. I find it to be almost like an undercurrent of the hard truths. But I know one thing that a lot of people, I guess, whether you have a neurological issue or if you are living pretty well and pretty healthy, is that people have to understand that resiliency is there for you from the beginning through your journey. And a lot of people, I perceive, lose touch with it. They don't understand their resiliency factor, especially if they're exposed to too much trauma. They tend to lean towards the negative and not get back to some grounding. So hopefully your show will be that grounding force that a lot of people will be looking for. So when we return, we're going to talk about the hard skills that will appear here on talkradio.nyc. Thank you for watching this episode of Frank About Health on talkradio.nyc. We'll be back in a few.
What really drives success in business? Introducing Intangify, the show that explores the intangible assets that create value and growth. I'm Matthew Asbell, your host and an attorney focused on innovation. Join me Fridays at noon Eastern to discover how innovation, culture, and other intangibles shape thriving companies from startups to established businesses. We'll share strategies to unleash your business's true potential. Tune in live on talkradio.nyc Fridays at noon Eastern and intangify your business today.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. Mira, I have to ask you two other things that came into my mind while you were discussing in the last segment about what a lot of leaders, especially female leaders, and what they're faced with. It's been that compound their trauma, among other issues that develop. I can imagine the Me Too movement had a piece of that, or even, without getting into the politics of it, because I try to remain distant from political issues or create controversy. The recent Supreme Court decision about removing affirmative action. I mean, I know that was related to college admissions, but we know that it goes through to the workplace once those individuals graduate, and then it could segment the population out. Now, I know that's key towards race, but I think it also trickles to people based on gender, based on sexual orientation, based on disability. So what do you think is going to be an impact that you might observe in the workplace based on what the Supreme Court has recently decided?
I mean, yes, it affects everybody, not just, one group of people. I don't think that, we realize that necessarily, but the fact is that the best organizations have already found and already know the research that is out there about the bottom line outcomes when you have a more diverse workforce, and when you support them, appropriately, and when you recruit for a more diverse workplace, and when you have the right policies in place and structure in place to support them, which is that they do better than all other organizations, 20% better often, for some of the best organizations that can do this right. And so, I think ultimately, and they also know that workers at this point have a choice. They can work where they feel they are most supported. And people are starting to walk away with their feet from organizations that do not support them and do not create a healthy work environment. And workers are looking for organizations that care about social causes, care about humans, support, focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, create the right policies to support them. That's where they're going to go. And so I'm actually excited to see how perhaps some organizations can create the change that we truly want to see, and how an empowered workforce could get us there, by just demonstrating where they're willing and wanting to work, and where they're going to put their creativity into to have amazing outcomes.
So basically, what can you tell us about the hard skills? Is it going to be like a lecture setup over the
I hope
course of
not.
no, I don't mean lecture in a negative way. I mean, you'll probably have a prominent guest based on whatever your topic is, and you'll probably be working with that guest in the conversation to help guide people who are whatever disabled class they might fit into or gender specific issue they might be dealing with. And maybe you would have an episode on resiliency, like I mentioned. Would you be constructing it as just an organic conversation mode, or will you be really looking to provide like a webinar type of coaching session? Or can you give us a preview as to
Yeah,
what your
yeah.
show might look like?
There are a lot of ways that people can go with these kind of podcasts, right? So
Right.
I will be balancing practical and research based. It is important to me that our conversations are, research based, research driven, and will be not necessarily, focusing, on disability only or mental health only or that kind of thing, but really like the skills behind what it takes to, fuel leadership, to activate real change in the workforce, and to create inclusive and healthy workplaces. So, what does that take though? It's going to take learning how to lead through uncertainty, which is always an issue these days, and through constant upheaval and chaos, right? Navigating workplace politics is always something that's going to be happening, creating critical organizational change. We'll talk about that. And I will have both experts, subject matter experts on for interview conversations. I'm also hoping to have some coaching sessions with leaders so you can actually hear the skill sets that we're trying to build throughout. We are starting with facing uncertainty as a leader in the first season. And I can share right now some of the topics that I've written down that,
Sure.
and I've already secured some folks to be talking about this, but
Are you're going to share by flipping the screen, or are you just going to
just by
share?
talking. Yeah, just by talking.
Okay, good.
So leading through uncertainty, we'll be talking about relationship to uncertainty. I have somebody coming on self-trust and uncertainty. I have another person talking about managing uncertainty when your gut is off, when you're, when should you not trust your gut? We're always focused on when should you trust your gut and why and how, when should you not? When to take a risk if you don't have a plan, or if you're not sure what's going to happen 10 steps ahead, like we're used to in, 3 years ago.
Yes.
So, and how to shift from survival mode to thriving mode again. So all of these things we're going to do in season 1. And then all of that is focused on reestablishing safety, trust, taking risks. Then we'll move into developing identity, where we're focused on identifying and validating our lived experiences, building self-trust. Mapping a strategy is the third stage that I'll be looking at, and that's probably season 3, where you're building self-efficacy and a plan and decision-making, and then navigating complexity and moving with impact. And all of that is in, my system. We talk about how to apply that system within your workplace. And, I welcome everyone who is interested, whether you're in a leadership position or whether you want to be, or whether you just want to be a great team leader, to come and join and listen and contribute. And would love to, have people on even for coaching sessions if you're interested.
Well, you did ask me earlier that you wanted to learn more about what it's been like to me be in my various leadership positions while living with epilepsy.
Yeah.
I have gone through the stigmas. I've gone through the abuse in the workplace, but I was able to bounce back from it using sometimes the law where necessary, but at the same time using some of my creative skills and being able to show this could be a violation of equal employment opportunity, EEOC. So if I had to use my perceived weakness as a strength, that in itself could give you insight into how an epileptic individual has had to deal with such diversity. Because the thing that is so confusing about epilepsy is that it is not an organic illness. There's no tumor behind it. There's no actual physical neurological deficit that people can blame epilepsy on. In fact, there are genetic links to reasons for epilepsy. So I'd like to forward my own invitation to be a guest on your show
We've already
so that I
talked
can.
about this. Yeah, we'd love to have you, come on the show and share that experience and what it was like for you to navigate. That would be fantastic, Frank.
I think the way that I always prided myself on using epilepsy to my advantage is when I saw everyone around me lose their jobs before me. I was the last survivor. In the music industry, when it was imploding and everyone was, every label was merging and people were just nowhere to go. But the thing is, it was my epilepsy that saved me for last. So that's the story I look forward to sharing on your show when the time is right. But
That
at the
sounds great.
same, yes, exactly. But at the same time, look at this, 2 minutes to end. But I just want to tell everybody, remember this date, July 28th, 2023 at 1 p.m. right here on talkradio.nyc. And just like tomorrow, before her show, which is actually on the 28th, tomorrow's slate of shows will be starting with Tommy D and Philanthropy in Focus at 10 a.m., Stephen Fry and Always Friday at 11, closing out tomorrow with Intangify and Matthew Asbell. And by the way, Matthew is looking forward to meet you. As we were talking, I'm going to forward this show because you will see it's going to be on YouTube immediately, so you can send throughout all of your social media. I'm going to forward it to him. He can take a look at our discussion, and who knows, you'll probably hear from him. But then I know Sam behind the scenes, we're all going to be meeting with you next Wednesday, and we'll be able to just really look forward to how Intangify, the hard skills, Frank About Health, the Conscious Consultant Hour, Always Friday, Dismantle Racism, Philanthropy in Focus, Intangify, as many other shows that also come onto the network are going to be working together in the fall, out in the open, post-COVID environment, hopefully, and at the same time, all of us together learning the hard skills. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here on this episode of Frank About Health. Mira, it is a pleasure to have hosted you because I wanted so much to also do my part to really set the stage for the launch of your show in about 10, I guess, a week, 10 days, whatever it is. And we will just basically be reaching out to you next week on another episode of Frank About Health. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're signing off now. We'll see you next week. Take care.
Thank you all.
Bye.